Welcome, everybody. Drum Education Live episode number 61. And today we have the great David Mortara. Don't get fooled by his name. His first name is English, his last name is Italian, but he's the master of Peruvian music. Not only in England, that's the most amazing thing. He's well respected in Peru as well. So now tell us basically how a guy from Hampshire got hooked so badly into Peruvian music.
Well, there has to be, well, in my case, there has to be a woman involved, and that woman is Carmen, who I met in 31 years ago, in 1990. I was a mature student studying at university. I met Carmen there. She was a mature student too. She came with a British Council scholarship, and we just happened to be next door neighbours in the halls of residence there, and we became friends, and then we got married the next year.
Oh, I thought we were going to say the next day.
Oh well, yeah, as fast as we could. Well, the thing was we decided to get engaged, but then me very naively I thought, well, it's very easy. I get engaged, I get married, and Carmen automatically has all the rights, as a wife that I have as a British citizen, and that is definitely not the case. And my naivety was very quickly evaporated, and I realized that the only way that we were going to have a life together going forward was to get married, and marry as soon as possible, in the sense that, to give you an idea, we got engaged, and literally within, as long as it took to have the banns of marriage, which was 28 days, we were married. Sure. And Carmen stayed here, much to the chagrin of the British Council, but they accepted that we were in love, and but that's the story of the connection. The connection originally was Carmen. When we got married, I travelled to Peru, and that was in 1991 in September, and I met a very distinguished musician. Well, he was the master of something called the cajon, which is a wooden box drum from whose spiritual home is Peru. And he was, because unfortunately he's passed away, but he was considered a master of that instrument, if not the master. And I met him, and I was just completely blown away by not only Peru, the whole experience, but the culture, and in particular the musical culture. Because prior to that, I'd played drums, and I played drums since I was about 10 years old. But when I was in Peru, I was at the age of 25. Was my first trip to Peru, and totally blown away. It was another way of thinking about music that I'd never encountered. I mean, I grew up. My youth was British pop culture, but Peruvian music is it's a totally different mindset to music. It's completely family based. So the whole point of Peruvian music is to bring families and community together in a way that we don't. Yes, it's just a totally different paradigm here. The music is it's commercial. You form a band. You play music in a band or as a singer-songwriter. You think about getting radio deals or pop being part of the music business. Well, there is a music business in Peru, but it's Um, it's not developed like it is in the United Kingdom, or certainly not the United States. But the point of music is to bring people together and cement families and communities together in a way that's probably much more like music is in parts of Africa, or parts of Eastern Europe, and it's ethnic music. It's music that has a different purpose, and that was useful actually, because that was what I needed to find with Carmen, something that we could share culturally, that would join us together. Because I mean, at that particular time, back 30 years ago, I didn't speak any Spanish. I was just totally immersed in this utterly foreign culture that I liked, and I felt at home in, but I didn't understand too much. And for me, the way to understand it was through music.
And why did the music uh, hooked you so much? Why did you get hooked so badly? That's
I
you
think
know
I think yeah. What can I say about Peruvian music? It's interesting. It interested my ear. I can tell you very briefly a story where I first met this master musician. Petiti is his name. Petiti, Serio Petiti. He taught at the National Folk Music School, which was literally in the same neighbourhood as Carmen's family's house, just a couple of blocks away. And Carmen took me to the folk school because I'd asked her, "Well, what's about Peruvian? What about Peruvian music? What is there?" And Carmen said, "Well," I said, "members of my family are musical, but I don't know too much. But the best thing is to go to the folk school and check that out." Okay, so I kept on pestering her, and I said, "Well, what is there with drums? What have we got with drums?" And she said, "Well, there's this thing called a cajon." And I said, "Yeah, what's that?" She said, "Well, what does cajon mean?" She said, "Well, it means either a drawer or a coffin." And I thought,
I did not know that.
Yeah, well, it's a Spanish word for both of those things. It can be a drawer or a coffin, or just a box. So that didn't really give me much. And she said, "Well, it's got a hole in one end, and then you hit it on the other end." And okay, I need to see this, I think. So, right, okay, well, I'll take you to the folk school. And we went there. And Lima, unfortunately, and its cultural scene is not very well developed. And the folk school in those days was a little more than run down shack of a house, and with no roof, incidentally. Lima doesn't get very much rain, and a lot of buildings there don't have much of a roof, and this one didn't have any roof at all. And I remember assembling in the courtyard with all these kids that were waiting to be taught. And then this very tall, blind black man came in, and they all fell silent. And he said, "Right, well, this is the lesson. You're going to start clapping." And he started to teach them clapping patterns for a dance called Marinera. And I heard that, and I said to Carmen in English, I whispered to her, I said, "That's interesting." Why? Because he was playing, or the clapping pattern was 3 with 2. He was counting it in threes, but there was 3 and 2 together, and I could hear that. And there's an ambiguity in a lot of Peruvian music that catches your ear. That's what draws you in. You're trying to work out what's going on there, and in a way that you don't, you just get, the upbeats of 2 and 4, the backbeat, and it's very, dare I say, once you've experienced and got into ethnic music, what you find is that rhythmically speaking, that Western music or Western pop music, popular music is a bit square, meaning it's on 2s, 4s, common time. You very rarely play in 3s, and if it is, it's characterised as a waltz time, and seen as a bit sort of a bit strange, like folk music, or a bit hackneyed, a bit. But no, not the case in Peru. They do play valses actually, but they emphasise very clearly 3 with 2, and I can demonstrate that.
Please,
can you show us?
Okay, well, I mean, the best way to count it is the best way to explain it is sat here would be to count it. So a waltz is counted 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But you find in South America and actually throughout the world in ethnic music, it would be 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3. So you've got the 1 and gives you a double, a duple there. 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3. So you got both. You've got 2 and 3 at the same time within the same style, within the same genre of music. And you were asking me, Felipe, what really caught my ear? It was that. It was as simple as that. It called me. The 2 and the 3 called me, and after that, I was sold. I was sold. And this, as I said, this tall black man, Petiti, he started this lesson, and I said to Carmen, "That's interesting," and he heard it. I don't know how, but he stopped the class.
He was blind. He was not deaf.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was blind, not deaf. No. Well, I know. I suppose he could have been Evelyn Glennie. It could be deaf and deaf as well. But no, he was blind. But his hearing was pin sharp. And he said, "Who's that?" And I was like, "Oh my goodness!" I interrupted the class. Anyway, but he heard me whispering, and he immediately got that I wasn't Peruvian, so there's somebody foreign here speaking a language English, as it turned out. So he came over. He stopped the class, came over, and he said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, no." Carmen said, "Well, sorry, teacher, this is my husband, David. He's interested to know about Peruvian music, and I've talked to him about the cajon, but he said, can you explain it?" And he said, "Yeah, sure. What are you doing tomorrow at 2:00?" And it was, nothing, obviously. And he said, "Right, I'm going to be round there. Expect me. Get a cajon." And he said, "I'm going to bring mine, and I'll teach you all about it."
Wow. I have a question for you.
Yeah, sure.
If I can just jump in.
Mm-hmm.
So up until this point, you played drums.
Yep.
And I would like to know your goals at that point. Did they just completely shift? Up until then, were you like, I'm a jobbing drummer. I don't know, in terms of your career where you were at, and I'd like to know if in that moment, meeting Petiti, you were just like, actually, I'm just going to change my plan.
Oh yeah. There was an epiphany. There was a moment. Yeah, definitely. Up to that point, I played drums, sort of semi-professionally in a dinner dance band. But I had the opportunity to become a drum teacher, and this was when I was in my early teens. I was taught drum kit by a guy called Jack Richards, and Jack Richards, I'm showing my age here, but he actually founded the National Association of Percussion Teachers in the UK. There was another guy involved, but and Nigel Shipway, who's a very famous orchestral percussionist, he was also involved. This was at Guildhall School of Music and Drama, which was the first proper conservatory to offer drum tuition, and I can say that I know that because Jack Richards wrote the original examinations, grade 8 examinations for the UK, and I was his guinea pig. So
Mm.
I was, at that time, I was Jack Richards' prodigious student, and I remember him saying to me, "If you want to become a drum teacher," he said, "I'll get you into the Guildhall." And he said, because it's got to the point where on drum kit, he said, "I've taught you all I can, and I'm actually coming to the lessons and learning from you." And what stopped me being a drum teacher was, I would go to the lessons. The deal was that my parents would take me to this place where he gave the lessons, and he said, "I'll teach you for free because I see that you're gifted, and I will drive you back home and drop you off on the way," because in those days he lived in Southampton, and in the south of England. And I remember one day we were talking about it. He said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a technical person as well as an artistic one, and I decided I wanted to go into sound recording. I didn't want to become a drum teacher, even though I was absolutely fascinated by drums. That's the reason. And I actually studied audio engineering, sound engineering, musical instrument technology, which is the design and building of instruments. I was at a place called the London College of Furniture, which it doesn't exist anymore, very sadly, but it was the top place for learning how to build pianos, guitars, synthesizers, and electronic audio engineering equipment. And there was a great teacher there called Tim Orr who ran fantastic courses. I mean, Tim worked for electronic music systems, and he designed, for instance, he was involved in the design of a synthesizer called the Synthy, which was used on Pink Floyd recordings like Dark Side of the Moon,
Cool.
by Brian Eno. It was the synthesizer. He was sort of Britain's answer to Robert Moog. So the Moog synthesizer in the United States. Well, Tim Orr was involved with EMS in the UK. Sorry, I'm having a slurp.
Oh, do it.
Yeah.
So
we do it all the time as well.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something that Felipe probably doesn't know, but I worked in a place called Roundhouse Recording Studios. I mean, we're talking about the 80s, when what I call proper recording studios with control rooms and well-managed acoustic spaces that you could fit sort of a 35-piece orchestra in, when those still existed. There's only 3 of those still existing today. One is Abbey Road. The other one is, there's Air Studios, Air Lyndhurst, which is at the top of Haverstock Hill, which was George Martin's last studio before he died. And what's the other one? BBC Maidvale.
So that was your path, was more, getting into recording side of things, and
yep.
And that's what you were doing. You were on your way, and then you went to Peru, and then it all went.
Yeah, it all went Pete Tong. No, it took a left turn, and well, prior to that, I was doing an electronic engineering degree, and I was sponsored by the BBC, which meant that during the summer months I would go and work for the BBC, and then carry on with my degree. At the end of that degree, unfortunately, I'd been offered a job by the BBC. It was naturally expected I would join the BBC, but then there were some cutbacks under a guy called John Burt, and he cut all their traineeships. So that I was left sort of floundering, wondering what to do. And that's where Peru came in, and my life, as I say, took a left turn, and Peru became my new destiny, as it were. I suppose it's as I say, I met this chap Petiti. I had some lessons with him. He asked me what I was on the last lesson, he asked me what I was doing that day, and he said because the folk school were getting together in this square to celebrate 50 years of the school, and he invited me along, and I joined this procession that went up to this sort of small square in Lince, which is a neighbourhood in Lima, and again there was this small stage with the kids that I'd met earlier who were being taught by Petiti. There were a couple of guitar players, and then in the centre, a throne, the cajon, and then Petiti just sauntered onto the stage, sat down, and I was literally, I couldn't believe what this guy was doing, what he was able to do with his hands, his feet, to singing, all at the same time. And Carmen was going like this, but like, no, this is interesting. I want to do this. This is what, I want to learn how to do that. I need to do that. And that's exactly what I did learn to do. I got a cajon, and I started to teach myself as much as I could, because I came back to the UK. Got a cajon. I got as many recordings as possible. I literally hundreds of recordings. We're talking about, this was the time of CDs, so I bought as many CDs as I could, and I listened as much as I could, and I travelled to Peru as much as I could, and contacted all the best music. I asked who the best musicians are. I just want to know who the best people are, and learn from them. And so Petiti was the first person I learnt with. Another one was Pepe Villalobos, who actually is still alive now, but he's the only one of my teachers who is still alive. There was Carlos Haire, who's probably the most important guitar player ever in Peruvian popular music, in that particular type of music. Carlos Haire, and Manuel Vasquez, another fantastic cajon player. So those four people really gave me an absolute fantastic grounding in Peruvian music. I mean, there's no question that those musicians are the best in the genre. And so
I have a question about cajons, actually, because
yeah, sure.
We had the cajon master on the other day, Felipe, and
Right.
he was talking about different types of cajon, and I wouldn't mind hearing from you the difference between a cajon that's from Peru and then the other types, and what the actual difference is, because I'm not clear on that.
Right. Okay. It just so happens I'm sitting on a cajon, but I've got another one here. The first thing to notice about a Peruvian cajon is that it's solid wood. The construction is solid. So this is mahogany. This is mahogany cajon. It's made by a guy called Pedro Rodriguez. So PR stands for Percusión Real, Royal Percussion, but it also is Pedro Rodriguez's initials. And there are two really good cajon makers. One is Pedro, and the other one is Alexis Castañeda. Alexis was also a long-term friend of mine. Unfortunately, he died in tragic circumstances, but his cajon company continues under Mireia, his wife. It continues on. So there's two makers of cajones in Peru, which I rate. Pedro's one, and Alexis Castañeda. You'll see his cajones come up as a tempo, A, and then tempo, TEMPO. So those are the brands, or the marcas, as they say, the brands to look out for. So typical of a Peruvian cajon, and it has these dovetail joints. It's not butt jointed. It's not tenon jointed. They use dovetail joints, and there's a reason for that, because Lima is very humid. It's a very humid city, and wooden instruments, they move, meaning that wood is an organic material and expands and contracts, and you can see that actually on the ends here. I think let's see if we can see that very closely. The dovetails here
Yeah.
They've shifted a bit proud
Yeah.
there.
Mm-hmm.
And wood can do that with dovetails, but it's still, the instrument still keeps its integrity. It doesn't split apart or fall apart.
Right.
So that's one thing. Also, if you look at the tapa, this covering here, everything is screwed and glued apart from this top surface. Now you'll find in most other cajones, particularly ones that come from a flamenco tradition, is they will have snares inside.
That doesn't have anything.
No, the Peruvian cajon, it gets all its galleta, which is its snap, from the fact that the top corners they're unfastened. So there's a small imperceptible sort of gap here, in the top, and it's that which creates the snap sound in a Peruvian cajon. So that's another thing that's slightly different. I mean, the instrument here is quite heavy. We're talking about an instrument that's about 6 to 8 kilos, whereas the plywood instruments that you'll see in either as sort of busking boxes or in flamenco music, they're usually a bit lighter. They're usually made of birch plywood, whereas, as I say, we talk about instrumento noble is an instrument that's made out of solid wood, and it uses proper joinery techniques as dovetails, to join the instrument together. So I mean, and that makes sense, because in Peru, you have the Amazon jungle there. You've got all the fantastic woods that you possibly want. I mean, mahogany is just one wood that they use for cajones. They use all different types of cedar wood. They use a wood called tornillo, which it looks a bit like mahogany, but it has a character all of its own, a warmth all of its own. But what you're looking for in a Peruvian cajon is a nice woodsy timbre, a woodsy sort of overall tone.
Could you play the cajon a little bit so we could hear the sound of it?
Yeah, sure.
And also, if you could demonstrate the 2 and 3 together.
Yeah, sure. So I shall play a valse.
Okay.
So as I explained earlier, it's really an adaptation of waltz from Europe, but that got transformed and adapted and adopted in Peru. And it has its own, as I say, unique flavour, which combines the 2 and the 3. And people talk about Afro-Peruvian music and Creole music, or canción criolla, Creole song. And it's this idea of taking a tradition or something from somewhere else, bringing it here, and then adapting it to their own local taste. So valse time is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So let me just play the valse, and then I'll explain what's going on.
Yeah, right.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3. So I'm counting along as I play. 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, and 1. So you see on my left hand, because I'm right-handed, that the 1 and the and in valse is being played by my left hand with the galleta. The galleta is that sharp crack sound. And with my right hand, I'm playing a repique with my right hand. This is that rhythm, a bit of movement, and it also indicates to your ear, or to dancers more importantly, where 1 is, because that's very important if you're because these are rhythms to be danced to.
I really like it.
So you got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So I'm playing on the 2 and the 3 in the triple, and then I'm playing on the 1 and the and with my left hand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And that doesn't sound like waltz from Austria at all.
No, it doesn't.
No, no, it sounds really. I like it.
Yeah. So people ask, "Where's the Afro in Afro-Peruvian?" And it is that it is the 2 and the 3.
Mm.
It's that bringing together of 3 with 2. Sorry, that looks a bit rude. But
no. You took it there, not us.
A bit cheeky. That is one of the simpler rhythms, I have to say, in Afro-Peruvian music, or canción criolla from Peru. But it's the one that shows you specifically how the foundations of the music. This is actually quite familiar to Felipe. As I said, we both share a common educator, a common teacher, who's Efrain Toro. And I would say, although I understood a lot of these traditions from an intuitive point of view, intuitively I could hear what's going on, I could hear that everything was interesting. I actually didn't know these traditions very well from a technical standpoint, and I think it was that Efrain gave me that technical understanding, being able to really understand what was going on from the point of view of mathematics and actually understanding how these things fit in within a larger scheme, which is a harmonic point of view. And what does that mean? Well, a lot of Western popular music is built upon rudiments. So when we talk about drumming in the UK and Europe and in the United States in particular, we talk about a drum tradition that's based upon marching, and so there's a whole set of rudiments like drags and ratamucues and paradiddles, well, all sorts of diddles, flamadiddles and all that sort of thing, which I learnt with Jack Richards, who I mentioned earlier. I mean, I learnt all the Swiss rudiments and how to play them, at breakneck speed and all that sort of thing. And I think that's that sort of technical side of drumming is very well developed in, is a very Western thing. It's based upon marching, but there's no such thing as diddles in Peruvian music. Or in a lot of ethnic music. If you ask, African musicians from the sub-Saharan Africa to explain, their drumming traditions, they explain it in a very, a much totally different way. But in Peru, they talk about, the gaits of wild animals. You've got to make it look like or make it sound like a hobbled horse or a lame chicken, or and it really is like that. They will look at the gaits of animals, and they would the gaits of the animal will be eccentric, and they use those analogies. Or in Brazil, for instance, you will hear Brazilian drummers talking about an egg rolling down the slope. So there's those sort of simple natural analogies that make sense to people who don't really come from a technical background. They just they hear stuff and they copy it, and that's how they learn, because that's how my granddad did it, or that's how my uncle did things. And a lot of ethnic music is passed down in that way. But the thing about Ephraim, I mean, his observations, his insights were that actually that instead of being on a timeline, which is it's how the paradigm of Western music is, it's in music notation, and pitch goes up and down, it's notated up and down, and rhythm is notated along a line. And we talk about beats and patterns and groove. And groove being sort of intricate patterns that make us want to dance. And Ephraim would say that's how rhythm appears. We talk about rhythm as being as consequent about music. So rhythm is a consequence of music. It's a musical thing. Well, his argument is it's not that at all. We got it the wrong way around. Rhythm is a universal thing. It's a universal principle where there's events happening all at the same time, and some of those events are related. For instance, if you twang a string, or you drop a pebble in a pond, there's an event. And what happens is the water ripples out, and it ripples out in a very relative way. So all the ripples are based upon a physical law, and you'll see that in all sorts of systems. As I say, like a twanging string. A string has got harmonics, and what you find that pulse has a harmony as well. So you'll have the fundamental pulse, which is 1. And then you'll have the downbeat and the upbeat of 1, and that gives you 2. And then you have 3, which is its own thing, but it's related to 2 by the dotted note. So what does that mean? If you have a pulse train, which is regular, humans like to group those things in 3s. They do. It's a human thing. Nature doesn't do that. Nature just sort of goes up and down in waves, and as they say, what goes up comes down. But humans like to group things in 3. But when you look at 2 from 3, you have what's called the dotted note. So you imagine a triple. So you imagine a triple meter. But let's say that you have you also then have a pulse that's a third slower than that. How do you define it? If you're looking at from the point of view of 3, that pulse that's a third slower, the 2, looks like a dotted note, and it does. If you're notating it, and you're in 3/4, the time signature of 3/4, and then you've got a duple. How do you notate it? Well, you either have it as 2 crotchets with the number 2 bracketed over the top, or you have it as 2 dotted crotchets, so it's 2 dotted notes. And that is pulse harmony. It's the very simplest, and it is simple actually, but the implications of it are not simple at all. So you'll have in Latin America or South America in particular, you'll have a particular way of voicing rhythms, which is fairly general to South America, and you'll see it in all sorts of styles, from samba all the way through to huayno, which is an indigenous rhythm of Peru. It's a universal thing. And it really is. I mean, the more I looked at it, the more I studied it, the more I thought, that's right. I mean, I see it, and I can understand it and get inside the rhythms and play them. So I knew I had all the intuition of how to play these rhythms, but Ephraim gave me the technical perspective. You can measure them; they're relative, and these relationships, and it's fascinating, and it opened. It was like another epiphany for me, really.
What does your wife make of all of this?
Yeah, she thinks I'm nuts. I don't know. I shall ask her. What do you make of? She's in the background here. What do you make of me being so absorbed by all this stuff? Passionate. Okay, there's a word.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm passionate.
Is that what your husband say to you, Kira? That you're passionate, or does he say you're nuts?
Wow. Probably the latter.
Well, I can also tell you that I've been told that I'm slightly Asperger's. Okay. Meaning, because people with Asperger's syndrome, they do tend to fixate on certain things, and I think to be interested in these things, you have to be a certain particular type of person. You will find those things interesting, and people will go, what? How's that? How is that interesting? But musicians as a breed we do. We get passionate about things that other people just don't understand.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why people want us to, well, do what you do for nothing, because they don't see the magic in it, and they don't see the fact that it's actually it requires a lot of discipline and hard work to do. Musicians make things look easy, and that's their job. And that's what's fun about music is to play it well. And when you play it well, it seems effortless. But the consequence of that is that people who aren't musicians, who don't really understand what it means to be a musician, will come along and they don't value that. And so they'll and musicians fall into the trap of going along with that pretense, with that misunderstanding, in order to get work or in order to undercut other musicians. That makes me a bit cross, really, a bit annoyed when it happens. I mean, I'm sure it's happened to every musician at some stage or other, where they've been asked to do mates rates or play for free or that sort of thing. I'm just trying to sort of give an understanding as why human beings do that. Why do they undervalue music? Because after all, music is life affirming, and you will hear people say, "Oh, I couldn't live without my music." Life's not worth living without music. I don't know what deaf people do, mind you, or people who really do can't hear music. They just hear noise or a jumble of sounds. But the majority of people, they will say, I can't live without music. I mean, in my case, I couldn't live without rhythm. Meaning that from I can remember when I was a kid of about 3 or 4 years old, I had an operation in hospital, and I can remember the trolley wheels going over the tiled floor as I was being wheeled to the operating theatre. I mean, it sounds a bit macabre, but I could hear that they made a certain sound, and that I thought, and of course my ear immediately listened to that. So I think my brain from a very early age, probably from the womb onwards, because it's been demonstrated that certain, that children will be calmed by the pulsation of their mother's heart, or other, sounds from outside the womb will automatically, stop a fetus kicking, and obviously it's listening, or doing something to make it.
Funny you should say that. My first daughter, when she was in when I was pregnant with her, she was very active, always like, going for it. And I'm like, can you just calm it down, love? And then whenever I'd play the drums, she'd go to sleep. She'd just chill right out.
Yeah,
that was nice.
It's like the vacuum cleaner effect, or the car ride effect. That's but it's sort of it's just that there is rhythm going on there. There is, even if you're going along in the car and the car's bouncing up and down, the suspension's bouncing up and down, it gets the kids off to sleep.
Yeah.
Why it does it? Why vacuum cleaner noise? Jury's still out, but it does. And you're right. Drums will naturally calm children. They will feel like dancing, or they will nod their heads or whatever. They will get entrained to the beat. So they nod their heads, follow along, and that's entrainment. Some people say that animals do that. You've got these things on Facebook where parrots and monkeys will do that. I think there's an amount of mimicry there, because you've got someone in the background who's doing the same thing. I don't know. I mean, maybe someone wants to research that. But you see.
I don't know, because I never had a parrot or a monkey, so.
Well, but you can watch all these inane videos on Facebook and see whether it's true or not.
David, could you show us that other instrument?
Sure.
Smaller one.
Yep.
And tell us a little bit about it.
This is a typical Peruvian instrument, meaning that it evolved in Peru, It's older than the cajon, which I was talking about earlier, which also evolved in Peru. How do we know that these things evolved? Yeah, people say, "Oh, how do you know that's Peruvian?" Well, you can actually do research, because part of what I do is I'm a researcher, and I'm not being glib either. I was a research fellow of King's College London for 4 years between 2002 and 2006, and I would go to Peru and I would go into the field, meaning that I would go into communities, and I would systematically ask questions about the history or about what people knew about these instruments. And also you can find manuscripts, you can find paintings. So, for instance, the first time that you see a depiction of this instrument, the cajita, is in 1785. There's an encyclopedia called the Codex that was commissioned by the Bishop of Trujillo, so that's a city in North Peru. It was commissioned by the church. Why? Because the church wanted to exert cultural control over its people, over its parishioners, and the way to do that is to log everything that they do. That was a way of the Catholic Church exerting control. If you know everything that people do, you can control them. Yeah.
How do you play the cajita? Show us.
Yeah. So let me stand up. You won't see my face, but that doesn't matter. So the cajita, this was originally an offertory box in ecclesiastical processions. So you would have dancers enacting devil, but it's a thing called a devil dance. The devil dances come from Spain, and they're actually linked to the Crusades, because devil dances really is an enactment of good against evil, and Christians and Moors, the Christians were the good, and the Moors were the bad, or the evil ones, and that's the way they were portrayed by the Catholic, or in Catholic events. Obviously, because that backs up their theory about what the Crusades was about. It was about Christianity assuming its place as the dominant religion. But anyway, I'm digressing there. But this instrument was used in ecclesiastical processions in order to mark time, or to collect money. But it had a secondary use, which was to mark time for the dancers as they processed, and they would do that, marking time with their lid. And then they had, originally it was called a matzo, which is a gavel, which was a small hammer, a small mallet on the end of a stick. But this ended up becoming this shape. Why? Because it's just easier to play, to play with. So that's a very simple rhythm on the cajita in order to accompany dancers. But you can also do free form dancing with the cajita. So a lot more complicated, but you could still dance to that. And so I was playing in fours on the tapa. So and I was playing in compound time on the sides of the box. So in sixes, and well, you can actually play. You play 7 and 4. So. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. There's a beat pattern of 7 going on with the right hand.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
So, but it comes across as it's a compound. So 7 and 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's a 7-beat pattern there, but it's within a compound 6.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it goes on. You have downbeats, and then it transfers to the upbeat, and then back to the downbeat again. And that's how you play 7, a beat of 7, within a framework of 6. But on my right hand, I can play the 4. So you're playing. But it's 2 and 3 again. It's but 2 lots of 2 and 3 is 4 and 6. 1, 2, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, but then the clever bit is to play. Well, there's all sort. There's a family of rhythms, but they're called bembe in Africa, and you hear those, and that's essentially what you're doing on the cajita.
Okay. And can you show us the other instrument?
So this instrument is called a quijada, or jawbone, literally jawbone. It's the jaw of a donkey or a mule, a smaller horse, so it could be a pony. And why is it better that it's smaller? Just because the larger one, I have got a horse jaw here. It's a lot larger, and it's actually it tires you out to play that. A much larger instrument.
Yeah.
You can. Yeah. So this is the jawbone from Peru. It's actually the partner instrument of what I showed you earlier, which is the cajita. So traditionally, the cajita and the quijada work together to provide the musical accompaniment to these devil dances. So in Lima, it's called the Son de los Diablos.
Okay.
But in the north, they have a version of the same dance, which is Los Diablicos.
Okay.
And then in another part of Peru, which is Puno, which is from that's near the border with Bolivia, they call it La Diablada. And the tradition I know best is from Lima. Pepe Vilsu is another iconic musician from Peru. So here we go. So what I'm doing here, I've got what's called a whistle. So that literally translates as bone, and traditionally it's a sheep's rib, which is used to scrape along the molars here of the jawbone. So it creates that scraper sound, but also then you can percuss against what would be on the horse or mule. That would be the cheek of the jawbone. So. What it is that the jawbone is they take all the flesh when the horse dies or the pony dies. They take all the flesh off. They literally pick it off. I know that sometimes they bury these in a termite mound, and they let the termites eat the dry flesh off the jaw, and then they dry it. They hang it up to dry. Oh, the other thing is they need to sterilize the bone, so they will boil it in a soap solution, and then hang it up to dry. And the best quijadas are ones that have aged in the sun, like these have done. So that gives them that. What you find is all the gelatin that's inside here will dry out, and then you've just got the bone left, and that's what's vibrating in your hand. So it's a combination of playing with the whistle and percussing with your hands. And you can imagine, holding this weight for a period of time. If you don't have the right technique, you quickly get fatigued.
Yeah.
And usually in these dances, you'll have 2 people playing the quijada. So someone would do it for a few minutes, and then another person would take over,
Okay.
and then the other person comes back in. But the thing is to keep your elbow very close into your side here, and that enables you to do this use this as a fulcrum, and to to cope with the weight of this instrument. If you hold it out here and do it, you'll quickly tire.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go, quijada,
Cool.
and these instruments, as I say, they're both older than the cajon. They have a history that goes back further than the cajon, even though the cajon is considered Peru's national instrument. All of these instruments actually have a history that's very interesting, very wonderful.
And do you have any idea of how old is the cajon? When it kind of first appeared?
I mean, the problem that the cajon has is that it started off as a very crude instrument. But the best educated guess, I would say, is that the cajon is between 200 and 250 years old. Why do I say that? Well, because we've got the bicentenary this year, Peru's bicentenary. And at the time of Peru's independence, there were a number of percussion instruments and a number of traditions that existed. And the cajon is since focused down on cajon over time. And people have forgotten where they've forgotten about these other instruments. But what's important to know is that that percussion has existed for a very long time.
Yeah,
it hasn't been for as long as the cajon's existed. There've been other traditions. Now there's an antecedent to the cajon. No, is that the word? Right? A precedent for the cajon. So there was a tradition that's even earlier than the cajon, which was in all Andean countries, but particularly in Peru, there's a tradition of playing the harp. And you'll see there are paintings in different collections. There's one particular one which I think is in the British Library, or in the British Museum rather, which belonged to which was it stolen? Well, it was appropriated by the Baring family, which were a British banking family. Well, why is that? Well, Chile invaded Peru in the latter half of the 19th century. There was a thing called the War of the Pacific, which was between three countries: Chile, Bolivia, and Peru. And some will say that it was motivated by the British. Well, it certainly was bankrolled by them, where the Chilean Navy went up into Peru and invaded, and certain artworks and library book, valuable library books and that sort of thing were appropriated by the Chileans, and somehow this particular painting, which is by a German painter, Ruyendas, Johann Mauricio Ruyendas, that's it. He was a German painter who went on what's called a grand tour, and he painted all these cultural traditions, even in Brazil. So you'll see some of the paintings he made of Brazilian traditions. Why? Because those things interested him. And you'll see this tradition in these paintings from the early part of the 19th century. And he made lots of sketches, and these things exist. And it also exists in the codex that I mentioned earlier of 1785. These musical traditions were recorded, and no cajon appears actually in the codex, but this tradition of percussing on the carcass of a harp does appear, and it's not a big stretch of the imagination to see that when the harp became less fashionable and the guitar became more fashionable, which is in the middle of the 19th century, where they needed a percussion, some percussion accompaniment, and the cajon evolved to fill that space. I mean, some people get hung up about it, and they say, "Oh, this person was the first person to use the cajon," or "This is when the cajon appeared," or the thing is, the cajon was a very rudimentary instrument that was made out of pieces of scrap wood. You know, as I say, the name of it is coffin or drawer, and it literally was that. It was a drawer that was a bit of furniture that somebody had adapted by nailing a piece of wood to the front, and there you have a percussion instrument. I mean, a table can be a percussion instrument. Yeah. It's just that in Peru or any Latin or any South American country, the thing is these are quite young countries, including Brazil's a young country. So it's everyone in South America, apart from the Guianas, they all speak either Spanish or Portuguese. So it's very important that they have their own cultural, their own identity, their own way of doing things. And I'm sure it's the same in Brazil. The cavaquinho, you're probably to say that, the cavaquinho is Brazilian. And say, right, okay. But it's the same with, but there are also other lute type instruments, which were everywhere over, across South America. I mean, you have the charangos in Peru, you have the tiple, and you have the cuatro, and you have all these, guitarilla and all that, and there were, so it doesn't really make sense to say really that the cajon is only Peruvian. You might as well say that the guitar is only Spanish. I mean, that again, that's total nonsense. I said, well, what about the guitar in Latin America then? For that case, no, it's. I mean, it's interesting to. We can talk about it. We can say that the cajon, maybe it came out of this tradition or that tradition, or it was had this precedent or that. But I think the important thing to know about the cajon is that it evolved in Peru in a very particular way, and it has very distinctive features that you don't find in other parts of the world. The cajon, a good educated guess is between 200 and 250 years.
Okay.
The cajon evolved in that time.
Thank you very much, sir. It was very entertaining and very educational.
Thank you. Well, that's what I wanted, and I hope that listeners, people dialing in, find some of or most of what I've had to say interesting.